Okay, g'day guys, welcome back to the channel, and as always, thanks for tuning in to check out this latest video. I've been out in the shed a little bit working on the VL lately, doing a few bits and pieces, so I thought it's about time I'll probably give you guys an update, let you know what I've been doing and show you what I've got planned next. Let's check it out. Starting on the outside of the car, the most obvious change is that I've removed all the chrome door handles and replaced them with black ones. I've done all four. I've done the other side as well. I'll give you a look at those. So they weren't chrome handles, the black ones. I bought a second-hand pair of original black handles. They're not chrome plated, they're painted from factory. So the prep is much easier if you start with a set of black handles in the beginning. All you have to do is give them a quick sand, prime them up and paint them. I finished those in satin black. I'll probably do the same with the chrome trims up and around the gutter and the ones on the top of the door molds as well. The next thing I've done on the car, both outside and inside, is replaced all the locks. So the boot lock and both door locks, as well as the ignition barrel inside the car, have all been replaced and are now all keyed alike. So it's one key to do everything on the car, which in all my life, every VL I've ever owned, I've never had one key do the whole car. It's always been a mix and match of keys. Along with installing all those new keys and locks to the doors, I've also gone and sourced all the slide locks, all the rods that connect all the door handles, etc. into the mechanism. So they're now complete. Both sides. The driver's door was missing a couple as well. So that completes that off. The door trims can now be put on. The last thing I want to do before I put the door trims on though is just finalise the position of those Walkinshaw door molds on the outside of the car. If you've seen some of the recent videos or you're a regular viewer, you'll probably notice that I've gone a bit backwards in the interior, in that I had the whole dash and centre console installed as well as the steering wheel. But I've since pulled the centre console out to install the power window wiring loom. While I was there and had everything back together, I also noticed that the ignition coffee pot, I think they're called, or honey pot, someone's previously painted it the wrong colour. So while I had it out, I gave this one here a paint up. I sanded it, primed it, and painted it with some colour match paint that I got mixed up at the local paint shop, and then installed my new ignition. However, whilst doing that, I then went to get out of the car and I pulled on the steering wheel a little bit and noticed that the steering column can pull out and push in, which is not right. So that is definitely not right. The steering column shouldn't pull up like that, and it should stay seated down in there. I've since learnt that there's a couple of pins in the steering column that must be broken. It's a safety feature, so if you're ever in a front-end collision, the steering column obviously doesn't come up and whack you in the face. So if the title of the video wasn't a big enough giveaway, now that you've seen that, obviously you'll know that today I plan on pulling out the steering column. So let's have a crack and get it out. To remove the steering column from the car, we need to disconnect it from the steering rack. To do that, we'll need to undo, there's two nuts down here. I'll try and get a shot for you. Two nuts down there that hold the intermediate shaft onto the top of the steering rack. If I move over here, you can see the intermediate shaft there painted blue. It goes down to those two nuts, which they just hold the intermediate shaft to the rack. There's a splined center and the two nuts and bolts hold it securely on there. So once we've undone those two nuts, we'll be able to move into the car and undo the bolts holding the steering column in there. Moving inside the car and up underneath the steering column, there's three bolts you need to undo. One will be quite tricky to get to. It's right down the back of the steering column there. You can just see the head of the bolt. It's really hard to get the light right and get the camera to focus, but that's it there. And then there are these two at the front that are relatively simple to get to. You've got that one on the right hand side of the steering column and that one on the left. Hopefully I don't have to remove all these lower trims in the dash again to get the steering column out, but let's get into it and we'll soon find out. So it turned out I did have to drop this side plastic to allow this air vent to come down so that I could pull the steering column out through that hole. I had to drop the plastic so that that tube there could sit a little lower. There's a big rubber boot that seals against the hole in the firewall there, and I just needed that lower to bring the steering column out through the hole. It turns out there's the one main bolt down the front was a 15 mil. The two that go up through the bottom of the steering column into the dash top were 13 mils. and the two that I got underneath the car were both 13mm nut and bolt, so 2 spinners down there, and just a heap of extensions and a universal wobble joint on the end to get that 15mm out, and it all came out pretty easily. So here's the steering column up on the bench, removed out of the car. The 2 nuts from here and here on either side of the steering column, they were both a 13mm nut. I was able to just get with a socket and an extension. This one down here, the main one that holds that bracket to the firewall, was a 15mm bolt, and I just used the universal joint on the end of a couple of extensions and a ratchet and got it out. So it was pretty easy in the end to actually remove it. This is the large rubber boot that I was talking about that I didn't have the room to get through the hole, which is why I had to remove all the plastics from under the dash. And this is the universal joint that I'll need to remove and put onto this other steering column that I've got. I raced out to my dad's and grabbed this one. I was lucky to have a parts car out there. I think it came from, it was a VB or VC, but I've measured everything up, all the mounting points, the electrical connection, all the inside of the end is exactly the same. So for all intents and purposes, I'm pretty sure these are identical from VB right through to VL. So what I plan to do now is undo this little clamp from around here. I'll paint up the intermediate shaft so it's black, get rid of all the blue overspray, swap it over onto this one, swap the boot over onto here as well. Paint up the honey pot the right colour so it matches this one. I could just swap them over as well, I could do either. I might paint it, seeing as I'm going to put the other intermediate shaft on and paint it anyway. This one's still got the little factory cover on it. It's just a plastic slip over cover just to keep dust and dirt and whatnot out of the steering shaft. Probably a bit of a giveaway why this one's missing and the steering column's collapsed. Maybe I should have noticed earlier, but all good. All right, let's get into it. I've given that intermediate shaft a quick sand just to knock the shine off the 2-pack blue that was on there and just smooth out the surface. I'm going to hit it with some primer and some paint. So intermediate shaft's all painted up and back in. I put the rubber boot on, made sure to face the hose clamp down, so if I need to undo that while it's in the car, I'll be able to get to it. Honey pot's all painted up and ready to go back in the car. Okay, so the steering column is back in. There's no more play in the Boss kit. The column no longer pulls out, so that's awesome. I didn't film much of putting it back in as it's just the reversal of the removal. I've got all the plastic covers back in. I replaced the brake pedal, the brake light switch while I was under there, plugged in all the wiring for the indicators and hazard lights. The way I got the steering column back in the car was I put it through the big hole you could see in the video just a little bit earlier. Got underneath and put the 2 bolts back on the rack. I'll give you a look at that now. Okay, so you can see the 2 bolts there. It wasn't too hard to get in. I just put the column through the hole in the firewall. I didn't bolt anything in up top, and then I just, while it was free and I had the chance to move it around and slide it on, I got the intermediate shaft into the top of that bracket just here. You can see the 2 bolts where they go through. One makes sure that the intermediate shaft can't slide past the bolt, and the other one there keeps it located onto the steering rack. Once I had those 2 bolts tightened up, I went back inside the car, and the first 2 bolts I did were the ones either side of the steering column that hold it up to the metal plate under the dash, and then I did the bolt right down the front that holds the front of the steering column to the firewall. You also have to make sure that you get that big rubber boot seated correctly on the hole in the firewall. I'm not sure if you're able to see it, but again, that bolt is just above that boot. That's a 15mm, and the 2 bolts that held the steering column in up here were both 13s. And that's how you remove and replace the steering column in a first generation Commodore. It was a fiddly little job, but I'm glad that's done because it sort of killed a few birds with the one stone. Replaced all the locks, so new ignition barrel in the steering column, as well as painting up the steering column that was wrong colour and tidying up the intermediate shaft that had blue paint all over it from when we painted the engine bay. Next up, the next job I'm going to do is remove all of the factory power steering and power steering lines because every time I look at it, it leaks. I've tried a couple of pumps, they all leak, I'm over it. I'm going to go to an Astra electric power steering pump. and lines, and probably hide the pump up under the guard and tidy up the engine bay a little bit at the same time. But I'm going to do that in a future video. So if you got any value out of this video, be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one. Thanks for watching.